Okay, so you've participated in our remembering quiz. If you're trying to skip that video and get to this one, the debrief, please don't. Go back and do the remembering quiz. It is fun and it is important. But having done the remembering quiz, let's have a look at how you went. First off, let's find out how many of the 8 you got. You don't have to have the precise exact wording that I'm going to give you right now, but they do need to be in order, and let's see how you went. Number 1, did you have the fun run certificate? If you had the fun run certificate and you had it as number 1, please give yourself a little tick. Number 2, the photo with the dogs. Number 3, the chess program. How are you going so far? Number 4, the football program. Number 5, grandfather's watch. Number 6, the surf wallet. Number 7, the grocery discount card. And number 8, dog vest. Okay? How did you go? Did you get 1? Did you get 7? Did you get 8? Doesn't really matter too much. Oops, get these out of the road. I'm not going to hold it against you. It doesn't really matter. And I don't need you to tell me that, oh, David, I only got 4. If you only got 4, it's okay. It's all right. If you only got 2, that's okay too. The point of the matter is what's important is what I'm about to show you, and we're going to reflect on how you went. And the way we're going to do that is, firstly, I'm going to ask you a question, and the question is, which ones did you get wrong? Were they early? Were they some at the end? Or were they some in the middle? Now, if you didn't get any wrong, you might just sit there very smugly and relax. But if you did get some wrong, where were they? I'd like to know. You don't have to tell me, but reflect on it. Have a look at your little list. Were they at the start, were they at the finish, or were they in the middle? And Psychic Damien is going to try and guess. And my guess is that they were probably in the middle. Probably between numbers 3 and 6. Now, you may be an exception against the rule, but that's okay. We've run this activity hundreds of times in classes, and inevitably, a very high percentage of the ones that get forgotten are the 4 in the middle, numbers 3 to 6. Okay? And why is that? Well, there's a reason for it. And there's a psychological principle, the law of primacy and recency. Sounds very exotic, doesn't it? The law of primacy and recency. And that tells us that our brains tend to remember the things that happen early and the things that happen late. Okay? So it's more likely that the ones you would have remembered were numbers 1 and 2, where you were really switched on and going, okay, I'm going to remember these things. I'm going to put them in my brain. They're nice and early. My brain's got plenty of room. I'm going to remember these things. Or numbers 7 and 8 because they were late. They were more recent. They weren't as long ago when we sat there and wrote out our answers. The chances are they're the ones that you remembered. The chances are that you might have forgotten some of the ones or got the order out of place in the middle somewhere. And that's okay. It's just psychology at work. But that's important for us when we're training people. We need to remember that the best way to help people remember things is focus very hard on what we do at the start and what we do at the finish. And that's why we do things in session plans and when we write essays of having introductions and conclusions. Because if nothing else, when you introduce the content, people should be alert and listening and focused. And then when at the end, when you summarize, it's so important that last couple of minutes is your chance to summarize everything that's happened and wrap it up and put it in a nutshell. So do that when you're planning your training. Think carefully when you're designing your learning about what you're going to have at the start and what you're going to have at the finish, because that law of primacy and recency can work for you or against you. All right. Now, the other question I want to ask you is, how did you remember the 8 items? How did you remember them? One of the strategies might be just to sit there and rote learn it and repeat it. Repetition is very important in training. Repetition is very important in training. Repetition is, you've got the idea. Repetition is very important in training. It really is. Okay? So never hesitate when you're training to repeat things, because quite often it's not the first time you say something that makes an impact. It's the second or third or 17th time that you say it that gets people's attention and they will remember it. So it's okay to repeat. I'm giving you permission to do it because, frankly, it works. That's how we learn things. Now, you might not have been sitting there repeating things over and over and over and over. You might have had some more exotic strategies at work. And I'm going to give you a few ideas on some of the strategies that different people employ to remember things. Maybe you used some of these in today's exercise. Maybe you didn't. Let's start with a mnemonic. Okay, so what some of you may have done, and I've seen this in classrooms where we've run this activity, is you might, instead of trying to remember all the words and all the phrases in your head, you might have just picked a letter. So, for example, with the first one was Fun Run Certificate, you might have gone F. F for Fun Run. Okay, and you might have just assigned a letter to each of the 8. In the back of your head, remembered what those things were, but really focused on remembering that sequence of 8 letters. So at the end, you could put those 8 letters down first and then work out what those 8 letters were. Clever, hey? It works very well, that strategy. So if you can frame the way you're training things and when you're designing your learning to create mnemonics and give them to your students, bargain. A classic of that is, example of that is Dr. ABC. You may remember that Dr. ABC is what first aid trainers get their students to learn. Now, it's become a little bit more sophisticated over the years, so it's not Dr. ABC anymore. These days, it's actually Doctors ABCD. DRS ABCD is the current trendy mnemonic in first aid because they've added more steps into the equation of what we need to remember when we're going to help people in a desperate situation. So that's a classic example of using mnemonics. You can use those in your classroom too. And in fact, during this course, we'll actually give you a couple of mnemonics to help you with your training. So keep your eyes out for that. The next one is grouping. Sometimes you can group things. Instead of trying to remember all 8, maybe you might have tried to group the first 4 and then the second 4. I'll give you one way you could have done that. With our exercise today, the first 4 items were all paper-based. There was paper. They were printed on paper. The second 4 were not. Now, if you'd just made that observation when you were trying to recall all 8 things, it would have made it easier for you if you'd remembered the first 4, they're paper-based. Easy peasy, lemon squeezy. Okay. Other ways you could have grouped things. Numbers, I'm trying to remember the numbers now. It was the watch and the wallet. So numbers 5 and 6 both started with W. So you could have remembered that. Another way that people remember things is often they remember colours very well. If you're a visual learner, you might remember colours. So you could have perhaps even remembered the colours of some of the items might have really helped you. The surf wallet, for example, was bright orange. Okay, a little bit of splash of orange. Okay, what followed the wallet? A card that was kind of orange. What it was at the end? Number 8. Big red dog vest. So you're starting to get a pattern that there's some very vibrant colours that you could have remembered as well. Also, stories. Stories help us remember things. Now, you might not have remembered the items so much, but you might have remembered some of my crazy stories where I'm going on and talking about the grandfather's watch and how I acquired it, or the interesting things that I observed in the football program. Those little stories may have helped you to remember the items. If I'd come on and just told you the 8 items in like 20 seconds, okay, number 1 is this, number 2 is this, number 3 is this, number 4 is this, number 5 is this, it's probably going to make it actually harder for you to remember. Also, the fact that I showed you the items, you had that visual reference, that's really helpful as well. In a classroom situation, I actually ask the students to hand these things around the room so you get that tactile feel of the things. You can sit there and have a bit of a look through the wallet, get a feel for it. There's no money in there. Don't panic. You didn't miss out because it was a virtual environment today. But you could have got more of a feel and more of a sense of actually feeling the objects. As it was, I showed them to you to try and help you with your remembering. The other thing that's really helpful with remembering as well is often timing. Be very aware of timing, of when you deliver things and when you show them to people. So timing can help your students remember things. Often if it's important content, show it to them and teach it to them when they're alert, when they're really awake. After lunch, maybe not so good. Maybe after lunch is a better time for telling stories or repetitive content of things you've already covered. So there's a whole lot of ideas as to how you can help your students remember things. Because ultimately, if your learners don't remember the content you teach them, then the content isn't that useful to them. One last thing I want to share with you. There is a word we use, a technical word we use for how we help our students remember things. And I've talked about some of the examples there. I've talked about the mnemonic, I've talked about the grouping, I've talked about the colours, I've talked about the stories. There are a lot more of examples than that, yes there are. But we have a word that helps us to trigger those things, and because what we're trying to do is we're trying to trigger those memories. And good quality trainers will provide those triggers, provide those advantages to their students and highlight them. The word for that is triggers. The technical term is triggers. If you can remember that, that will help you. And that's one of the takeaways from this whole episode. So remember that word triggers, because create triggers, embed them into your learning to help your learners. So in summary, a few things to take away from the remembering quiz today. Okay, use those triggers, put them into your learning. Have those triggers there, make it easier for your students. Remember also the law of primacy and recency. Put the important things first and last. And also remember repetition. Did I mention that repetition is very important in training? It is. So take away those things with you from this remembering quiz. I hope you did well with the quiz. I hope you're happy with your efforts. And more importantly, I hope you're happy with what you've learnt in this video and that you apply these things for the benefits of your students. Thanks for participating.